Hi, everyone. This is Asim Chandra, your host for the Rev Signal podcast and webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. Very excited to welcome Dutta Satadip to our show today. He will be taking us through his arc as leading up customer success and customer-facing organizations over the course of his career that spans Pinterest, Google, and more recently as Chief Customer Officer at ActiveCampaign, which he's in the process of now looking at his next opportunity, but we'll share with you by the time something like this goes live on our website. So Dutta has a very strong history of using data to transform customer-facing organizations. And we're going to focus on a couple of key areas today. One around Pinterest, which we're most familiar with as consumers, and but there's obviously a B2B angle to it. So we'll cover that with Dutta to understand how data is actually leveraged in the selling process at Pinterest. And then the second area around ActiveCampaign, very different business. It's a CRM, B2B, traditional B2B business, that provides CRM applications. So the customer success role in that organization is very different, and how product data can be utilized in that context is obviously very different. So Dutta, I want to start off with a quick introduction first to your career arc, and maybe take us a little bit through your story before we get into what we're here to discuss today.
Of course. So when I graduated as somebody in computer science. I had my initial kind of span of my career in engineering and development side of the house. But over a course of my career, I transitioned into more business-focused roles. And at Google, I got the opportunity to really think about end-to-end customer experience and build one of the first customer success organizations that comprised everything from onboarding, ongoing account management, customer success, pre-sales, sales engineering, all of those types of functions. I subsequently left to join Pinterest. They were growing super fast, very exciting. One of my passions is to build great organizations, keep the customer first notion as a driving principle, but do it a lot with a focus on truly understanding that with data. And Pinterest afforded me that opportunity to build a similar organization. I also had some remit around operational excellence and strategy around that. And then subsequently, I joined ActiveCampaign. It is a B2B email marketing automation CRM solution that is targeted to SMBs. The company has almost 180,000 customers. And again, I was responsible for very similar remits, build the end-to-end organization, figure out why our customers want to stay with us, help them grow, and help the company grow in the process.
Got it. Awesome. So obviously, you've worked with some of the top companies in the tech industry, and I think there's a lot to unpack and learn from today. So Dutta, maybe let's start off with Pinterest. I think your experience there, most of us have experienced Pinterest as consumers. So help us understand in that context, your role there, and what's the B2B side of it that obviously you were involved with?
Of course. So Pinterest is, most people have experienced Pinterest as a consumer. But the way Pinterest actually makes money is via advertising. And although all those advertisers are essentially, it's a B2B platform that lets you buy ads and get paid leads via those ads. Typical types of customers on Pinterest is everybody from large retailers to major CPG brands, auto brands, travel brands. So pretty much anybody who wants to advertise with a relevant demographic that's on Pinterest is a customer. The challenges really in the advertising business is it is purely a consumption-based business. You can sign a deal with anybody, but ultimately you get paid if the ad gives you outcomes. So that's the real business, the business outcome that you have to solve when you're thinking about data and everything else on the Pinterest side of the house. How do you help your customers who have bought advertising get those outcomes?
Yeah. So I think that context is incredibly helpful in understanding your role and sort of the B2B side of it. Now, I assume in that context, there's a sales team that sells advertising to publishers, to advertisers, and then you have some consumption-based reporting that goes out that helps them understand where the ads are being placed and how the ads are being viewed, et cetera. So obviously, at the scale at which Pinterest operates, data is incredibly relevant and important to communicate the value that you're creating for advertisers. So that's maybe take us through a little bit of that to help us understand what role does the data play in that context, and then in particular, what's the angle around product data that's relevant in that context?
Perfect question. So I can start maybe with a little bit of sort of like first principles, sort of around what happens or what is the actual challenge, right? Everybody wants to be data driven. Of course, there's a lot of data about users, and sure, you should be using them. I think one of the fundamental challenges that at least I experienced at my time when I started this at Pinterest, and it's very similar to when I did an active campaign. When data is collected, it is collected for a purpose by more, not ideal, but this is what happens, by a team. So for product, it is, hey, we have released a feature. We want to see how many people are using that feature. And that resides in some sort of a database that's in the product, and it's probably in log files and a whole bunch of other places. The salespeople, at least in Pinterest, were operating on Salesforce. Completely different set of data, who they're targeting, why they're targeting, are they direct, are they channel, what kind of budgets they have, so on and so forth. And then there is a third or maybe a fourth or a fifth system. We had multiple from the customer kind of post-sales side of the house, which starts with something like Zendesk, and that has things like your issues, what's going on, basic kind of like account management plans. Sometimes they're in systems, sometimes they are in documents, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a lot of data, at least that's what I found, but it was very hard to connect why and where the opportunity is for somebody to pick up the phone and get a good outcome, which is not like, oh, cool, it's Pinterest. It's, hey, this is insightful information for us to follow up on a conversation and give you some ad dollars for you to spend on your product. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sort of the setting. There is a lot of data in the ecosystem. However, to make sense of it, you actually need to connect a lot of these dots to identify why somebody should call. And number two, why, if you call, somebody will most likely pick up the phone, quotes unquote, not actual phone, but the email or whatever, right? Or take the meeting, and it'll result in a good outcome.
Yeah. So I think understanding the different types of data, the context of all these different systems internally is super helpful. But maybe take us through a specific example, right? So you talked about this idea of somebody calling in, right? So let's say there's a conversation between an advertiser and a salesperson at Pinterest. What role does the data play in that conversation to help the future potential customer prospect to understand the value that Pinterest provides based off of the data that they're collecting?
So first and foremost, where we started was the simplest thing is, start with existing customers, right? And if something is working, you want them to do more of that. That's like the basic driving principle. So one of the things is when somebody starts an advertising campaign, they try to target different audiences. And nobody really knows, at the outset what's going to work. I mean, you have a thesis, but as time goes by in that campaign that runs for 14 days, 1 month, 2 months, you start to get different insights. The first thing we said was, hey, why don't we use the performance data of the ads, which was coming from the product, to basically tell the sellers which categories are performing and see first pure efficiency, if you can shift budget accordingly and get to the same outcomes, and then place a call to the customer and say, listen, you're getting these great outcomes. These are exceeding the goals that you had set for us. And you should be considering spending more money. So that was like a step one of like the basic, it's performing, not performing. If it's performing, first optimize. And if optimization is successful, then you talk about the optimization process, but then you ask for more money. The second thing where we ultimately ended up going was really to start to say to these customers and new customers, here are some external things that are going on. And external things are relatively easy in the world of advertising. There are moments that matter, either moments like, seasonal things like Black Friday or, 4th of July, graduation, all of that stuff. Or there are like more personal moments that people sort of self-identify themselves, right? Birthdays, weddings, all of that stuff. So one of the things we said was like, hey, here is the type of folks who are in the system. And here is the actual opportunity out there. And this was an interesting thing because we would take them and we would have our calendar and we would say, hey, it's Black Friday, so people want to plan for these campaigns starting September. So let's tell them first around some trends that we have observed, some opportunities that they can capitalize it. And the way we did that was we took all these product signals, some of it user data, and then we balanced it with what they have been doing in the system, their own results, to basically craft that first skeleton of a pitch. Now, we were not doing like automated pitches and sending out. We're giving basically Salesforce opportunity that had all these pieces of information and giving them to the salespeople and saying, here's your list of opportunities for the week. You know what's best for your customers, but from a data perspective, here's a list of things, here's a list of 10 to 15 things that might be useful. Now, we started by giving people everything, and one of the iterations we made was, it was too much information. So
that's a good point. So
we had to cull it down, right? But that's the overall process, kind of how we chose to make that happen.
Let's maybe linger on that point for a moment. So this idea that data is obviously useful, and pretty much every organization that we talk to is swimming in data these days. The question is, how do you take what's relevant and make it consumable for the person in their role? So in this case, a salesperson engaging with an advertiser. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, can you share an example of where the data was overwhelming and had to kind of cut back to something that was relevant for that individual in that role? What would that look like? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
So this is where we were initially using a lot of product and sort of external data to sort of drive this. But this is where we felt like we had to use data from some other systems to prioritize it. For example, let's say somebody did have a successful outcome, right? But they had some really negative experiences with support, or we couldn't really figure things out because there's some product issues and they're all living in Jira/Zendesk. So when we start to prioritize, we start to sort of prioritize sort of issues in buckets versus just saying everything is important and this is a list of 30 things you can go after. We basically said, here is sort of our order of priority. Now, you may still have some issues, and that may be because it's a new product and the customer is okay with it, but you should know upfront, like the customer had some issues in the last 90 days, or in the last 60 days, right? So that was one of the pieces of information we incorporated. The second piece of information we sort of incorporated was actually talking to the teams and saying, listen, we can only go through so many, right? So giving like an extremely large number of things every single week doesn't work. Also, we wanted to make sure, like, when you develop these systems, they don't know how often to process. So if it's an opportunity today, it's an opportunity tomorrow and day after, and the system keeps spitting out. So one of the things we had to do was to basically say, hey, I got this, I responded, and you need to sleep on this opportunity and not put anything else up for the next 60 days, or I'm already having a conversation and you need to pause giving me more. So we did really some work with the sales folks to sort of have that level of feedback cycle going into this process to make the process of ingesting this data and this opportunity in a meaningful, productive way for the salesperson.
Got it. Very cool. So I want to shift gears and talk about active campaign as well. Tell us a little bit more about the breadth of your role there, because we talked a little bit about this before you left there. In terms of and the evolution of the organization that occurred during your tenure. It'd be very, very helpful to understand how the organization scaled in the time that you were there.
So I think one of the things that was sort of, I think any growing company goes through many sort of like growing, scaling problems. We had a lot of great customers, but we had a large volume of customers. And one of the things that we had to really figure out was, who do you need to provide high touch service and who do you need to provide scaled service? And one of the things that we really wanted to double down and work on is not everybody can have a CSM. It just doesn't work that way. Some people should have CSMs. What is that segment that would benefit for CSMs?
Yeah.
And then we also wanted to make sure that we are providing some level of proactiveness to folks who may benefit from a proactive service, but not necessarily an ongoing relationship, right? So that's like one anchor. The second anchor was really around making sure that our support function is functioning and is able to respond to questions, things, etc. As it happens with most products that are multi-product, have lots of features, generalization only goes so far. So we did go through some process of not only going from a completely generalized model to a specialized model, but we also introduced sort of things like screen shares. Because one of the things we found was a lot of customers ask questions, but they don't know how to uncover and unpack that solution. So being able to do a screen share and showing them how to do things was a more effective way of not only resolving the issue, but also helping educate the customers at the same point in time. So those are a few things I can talk about sort of like as the organization grew. We wanted to optimize both on scale, but also on experience.
Yeah, I think, the point you made earlier about the fact there's 180,000 customers, you obviously cannot scale linearly and have the same level of engagement with each customer. You have to segment the account base, and then you have to organize your teams internally to engage with them through technology. So Dutta, take us through a little bit of that transformation, sort of the before and after, right? So when you joined, what was the state of affairs? And then as you left, what transformation had occurred in the organization with your leadership?
So one of the things I will say, first things first, right? Like when I talked to my team members as I started, it was clear like everybody was trying to help the customers with the best of the availability, right, but they didn't have complete visibility.
Yeah.
Right. And my first thing that I did, like within the first, I would say, quarter and a half, was to get a customer 360 built, which basically, if you go and you query a customer, you can get what their account plans are, what they have been, which features they have been using in the product. Do they have issues? Are they using Help Center? Like a full sense of what has this customer done with us, right? Including like Jira tickets, all of that stuff. Now, it turned out visibility is the first step in sort of, before we get to sort of like insights, action, you need some level of visibility. And so we centered this really around understanding what customers are doing and the full kind of package on that. And that was basically deployed to all of our sort of like our proactive teams, people who are getting on calls, etc., to really understand, hey, this is what's actually going on with the customer, right? From a process and other perspective, we had a lot of sort of like handoff kind of challenges. Who does what? And we had to take some time to really say these issues are really belonging to this team and they need to go here. And just because you're a CSM, we needed to shepherd it, but you shouldn't be attending like every single product meeting trying to get updates for this, right? Like, how do you get sort of that thing going? The second evolution that we went through was, okay, so I'm going to just take a simple example around like the proactive CSM scale engagement sort of a model. Who do we engage to? When do we engage? Because if you're a strategic account, you already have a book of business. You kind of know who your list is and it's been predetermined and there is, expansion, retention targets on you and you kind of know what you do. For the scale teams, it was important to sort of help them understand who do you talk to, because there's no way for them to actually parse through every customer and look for things. So this is where really we start to use a lot of product adoption data and really getting an alignment with engineering and developing a product adoption score that actually helped drive a lot of the scaled efforts that we went through.
Got it. So that I want to double click on this last point about the product adoption data. Obviously, product data has a lot of complexity, and maybe talk a little bit about when you say product adoption data or product usage data, like what does that mean? Like what are the data sources? What kinds of information you're looking for in that data that's useful for a CSM or for a go-to-market team?
So I think we were very fortunate and lucky. At least when I joined, I was lucky. A lot of the infrastructure had been built where data from different sources, whether it's Pendo, whether it is logs, etc., were all sort of being pumped into Snowflake in a Snowflake instance, right? So we generally had most of the data sitting in one place. That is not a given. In many situations, in Pinterest, that was not the case, right? Over here, this was the case. That was a good start. But the problem or the challenges were around, honestly, alignment, right? For a product person, if somebody is using a particular feature a lot, it's success. But utilization is not the equivalent as adoption. Right. Also, how you adopt is different. There can be adoption via friction. You put an interstitial and you say, you have to do this to move forward. Yeah, you're getting adoption, right? And adoption as a result of value is a very different thing, because you're going to see that as something that is helping you move forward, do your tasks better, right? So a big kind of portion of our alignment with engineering was around, hey, is it utilization or adoption, which is percentage of customers? Which features do we believe to be core? Which features do we believe to be tertiary? And then how are we going about driving that? Is it quotes unquotes with friction or with value? So that was, I think, a big portion of our alignment process that helped us arrive at the adoption scores we did, that eventually then powered us to kind of have much more meaningful conversations with our customers.
Got it. Got it. And obviously there's a lot of richness in how customers use your product and the data that you can therefore capture out of it through various instrumentation methodologies. What were some of the challenges that you hear about from the product team or the engineering team in trying to make that data consumable for the go-to-market side? Like, what were some of the issues that they would run into? How long, and you said some of this infrastructure is in place already, but I'm sure as new enhancements, requirements, et cetera, came up, curious what that looked like.
I think some of them are like, may sound super simple, but it's never super simple. Things like labeling, right? What is a customer? What is an account, right? What is the right level of granularity you need to log something, right? Like, this was like a constant discussion. Because you can go and do infinite levels of granularity, but then you're getting tons of almost event-based information coming into the system. And then what you do with it, right? Because not all of capturing every click stream is also not the most important thing. So it was always this very interesting back and forth I felt around the right level of detail that you need to capture, number one, and number two, nomenclature. And that happens, I think, with every product. Some of it is already built and it doesn't have the nomenclature. So now you have to do some level of data mapping. Oh, these things actually mean this. Because the other option is to go and refactor every piece of code that was doing that. And, you know, when you're a growing company, like, you have to balance how much you want to invest in infrastructure versus adding new innovative features for your customers, right? So those were some of the, I think, the back and forth we went through in the process of alignment.
Got it. I think both issues that you just outlined around data labeling and nomenclature, as well as you've got all these click streams coming through at a very granular level. What's the right altitude at which you should actually consume the data? So now maybe let's look at it from the lens of the consuming organization, right? From your team. In terms of taking these event streams or these very granular data sets, converting them into something useful for your team, and then sort of extracting the insights, creating actions. Take us through that journey. What are some of the challenges associated with that?
Right. So our initial approach was to sort of just try to parse through data and find answers. And I'll be upfront, it was tedious and the insights were not that great and it took us nowhere. So one of the things which I've done in the past is go back to first principles, right? And have clear hypotheses in place. And these were business-driven hypotheses, right? So as an example, someone is not using some sort of feature. So I'll give an example. We want to know people have e-commerce sites, they're using our product, and there are some simple automations in our product that you can implement around things like abandoned cart, right? Like if people have not completed the purchase process themselves. So we clearly know, like, if they have this is like a good thing for them, but they're not using it. Why are they not using it, right? Maybe they're not aware, maybe they tried and failed, numerous reasons. We don't have to go through, unpack all those reasons, but then we need to have a clear hypothesis, like, we believe these are customers who should be able to get some value if we have a conversation and explain to them, right? So we started with first principles, and then we used the data to sort of understand where have they never implemented, did they get stuck? And based on that analysis, we formed very similar opportunities. We were using Tatango in this particular case. This was sort of being fed into Tatango and then sort of activated by the teams at large, reaching out to customers and saying, hey, it seems like you're paying for this feature, you have the infrastructure, and you're not taking advantage. Can I jump on a call and show you how to do this? And that's basically what helped kind of drive a lot of the product adoption in those sort of areas.
Got it. You've covered a lot of ground as far as product adoption is concerned, and obviously it's the earliest indicator of whether or not a customer is going to retain or churn. Can you talk a little bit about the later stages of the customer journey as they approach a renewal cycle, for example, or potentially for an upsell? What's the value of product data applied to those use cases?
Absolutely. So one of the things we did do also was we had a lot of customers on monthly plans. And we made some very concrete efforts along the way to convert them into annual plans, right? Because obviously they retain longer, they see the value. But to go about identifying them, of course, we looked at product adoption data. But the second thing we also looked at is support tickets, issues, etc., and combined that with that. The third thing we sort of also looked at was a little bit of an external information plus CSM-driven information around what is their business cycle look like and when do we want to reach out. We kind of played with a whole bunch of factors in this. Some of them were like, you really don't want to reach them out like right before the renewal cycle. Like this is the month of the renewal, like this is the 2 days before like your thing is going to go through, you're reaching them out. That kind of looks weird, right? So you want to have this conversation a little bit ahead in time, but how much ahead in time? So those are some of the pieces of information we really work with to sort of understand timing of conversation, what worked. And honestly, some of this was trial and error. There wasn't no real product data that would tell us, but we ran different types of campaigns in different segments and then compared which is the most optimal time for something like that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Very helpful. So that's, I think, in terms of the ground that we've covered across Pinterest and Active Campaign and sort of the sales angle with Pinterest and the customer success angle with Active Campaign. It's been a very rich discussion. Any advice for companies that are starting out on this journey, particularly earlier stage companies that are starting to ramp up? What would you suggest they do different in terms of building out some of this infrastructure or acquiring some of this infrastructure as they go about it?
I think this is some things that you guys do at Immersa, and I think that is a very important point. Part of the reason this becomes so challenging downstream, like everybody thinks about this is like, we will get to this when we get to a later stage, right? And the challenge with the later stage is you've already built a whole bunch of stuff, and that doesn't have the data, that doesn't have those hooks actually, that nobody has actually thought through. I'm sorry to say, like very simple definition of customer, account, and at some point, most companies use some sort of a channel, right? So that channel partner relationship, right? You don't build them. And then down the road, when you have to refactor the code, it's like so much harder. So my personal advice is start early, start with, a tool that helps you kind of unpack some of this complexity from the get-go.
That's fantastic. I'm seeing some comments here from Felicia that I think are worth calling out for those of us listening and not watching the show. But her point is the observation that a lot of companies are using many point solutions to collect data and different data sets that don't talk to each other. So it's very challenging, for example, to link support data from Zendesk with customer data in another system. Any advice for those companies who struggle to get most of the data from different systems? So anything you'd add, given that context, to your previous piece of advice, Dutta?
Absolutely. Thank you, Felicia, for the question. I think it is a constant struggle. I really wish there was a simple answer. And I do think some of the things that companies can do early on is to have that mindset of a common, not a data dictionary, but like a common set of here are things we would actually want to use down the road. Because I think what ends up happening at a more fundamental level is everybody operates in their own world. So nobody thinks of connecting anything, right? Simple thing, right? Which customer is actually asking for the bug fix? Is it like in your Jira system, right? In many cases, you would find that somebody just says, here's a ticket, and there's a Jira link to that ticket, but who is the customer? How many customers are doing that? Those linkages, I think, are something that then it requires a little bit of thoughtfulness from the get-go to say, we want to make sure like anything that we do is connected to a customer. And even that design principle and asking that question and asking for the data from the get-go, I think can go a long way in sort of connecting those gaps.
Yeah. And Felicia, we're just, if you're not familiar with Immersa, a lot of what we do is essentially connecting customer data with finance, support tickets, with product usage data, et cetera. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to address that. Dutta, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you if they have any additional questions or insights they'd like to discuss with you?
Sure. I think the best thing is I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is Dutta S, D-U-T-T-A-S. So feel free to connect with me and shoot me a DM, and we can go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. For those of you listening in, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your questions and insights along the discussion. If you'd like to reach me, you can find me at asim@immersa.co or on LinkedIn. And I look forward to having you here again next week for another exciting session. Thanks for joining. We'll wrap up here, and we will be sharing a recording of this call shortly after, so you can pass it on to your colleagues who weren't able to attend today. Thanks so much for your time.